Good evening, everyone. I'm still letting folks into our session, so let's just give people a few minutes and let everyone get in.
Ken, if you're speaking to us, you're muted.
I started sharing my screen. Hopefully everyone can see the screen okay. Does everyone see it's an introductory slide with my picture on it? Does everyone see that okay? I'll need at least one person to unmute and confirm for me you all are viewing this okay.
Again, we can see it.
Okay, perfect. Thanks, Evan. Okay, we're going to go ahead and get started. Uh, Good evening to everyone who is joining us. We'll probably have people who will continue to join us throughout the presentation, and that's fine. My name is Professor Ken Newby. I'm happy to welcome you to this introductory session to the social justice debates format. I know that many of you may not be familiar with this format, which is why you're attending this session, although we do have some folks who are very experienced in this session with the format. I see, for example, Eben has joined us. I see Faith has joined us. I see Farissa is here. So we do have a few people who are here who have some familiarity with this. If you have none, then you are, I assure you, in the right place, because the purpose today is to go over the social justice debates format and how that format is different than the format you may be more familiar with, which is the British parliamentary debate format of debate. And so my presentation style is a little bit different maybe than traditional styles because I love questions. And so I'm working off multiple screens. So even though all of you, as I can see, have your cameras off, if you raise your hand, and there should be a way you can raise your hand and do a reaction at the bottom of your screen. If you have a question at any time, feel free to raise your hand, and then once I conclude that point, then I'll call upon you. In other words, you don't have to save all your questions to the end. I prefer, in fact, an interactive discussion and conversation whenever I present. And so I don't think today needs to be any different. Ooh, our numbers are getting very, very good now. All right. So that said, let me see if I can get the slides working to advance. There we go. So today we are going to, well, let me double check. This session should be recorded, although I did not see, let me just confirm the session is recording properly if I can, because I was asked to record the session and I did set it up to record.
Yeah, Ken. I can see that it's been recorded.
Okay, perfect. All right,
Yep.
thank you. Thank you for that, Eben. And so uh, let me just give you an overview of what we're doing today. Number one, we're going to cover the differences between British parliamentary debate and social justice debates as a format. Number two, we're going to talk about the differences between POIs, points of information, and cross-examination, which are the ways that you ask questions in debate. In BP, we use POIs. In social justice debates, we use cross-examination, which is a very different way to ask questions. The second key difference that we're going to go over today, I think, between BP and other and even world schools to a certain extent is the research-based focus that social justice debates has, as opposed to BP, which is, of course, more being an extemporaneous format, and you only getting the motion 15 minutes before the debate doesn't give you the same opportunity to conduct in-depth research and have evidence available to you to support your claims and assertions. So I'm going to talk to you a bit about gathering evidence and how you organize that evidence and how you use that evidence in the debate. This session won't get in depth into the topic itself, understanding the topic and how to construct a debate case within the topic. That will probably be the focus for the next session. Marissa didn't know this, but I don't intend this to be the only session before SJD in Arusha next month. I'm actually, as I was preparing for this session, it occurred to me that the group could probably benefit from a couple of more sessions, frankly, in order to make sure that you guys are prepared and so that your time in Arusha is most enjoyable. That being said, that's what we're doing. That's what's on the agenda for today. Are there any questions before we begin? No, hearing none. Okay. Let me open up one document and then I will start. Bear with me a moment. I'm trying to orient my screen so that I can still allow people to see the screen where I let people in while we begin. Okay, I think we are. I think we're good. So, what is British parliamentary debate? I'm guessing most of you know what British parliamentary debate is. It's the most popular format of debate internationally. Sanctioned by such tournaments as the World Universities Debating Championship and PAUDC, the Pan-African Universities Debating Championship. There are 4 teams of 2 persons on each side from government and opposition, each presenting different arguments on the same motion, meaning you've got 4 teams that are all vying for a rank in the debate when you have BP. And that's generally how it goes if you've never seen BP, but I'm assuming most of you are actually familiar with BP. The emphasis in BP is on strategic argumentation and clash, each team having their own unique contribution to the debate, which is why for bottom half teams in BP, the extension of new material and new contributions by back half teams is pretty important. And you'll consistently hear this thing of be comparative. We need comparative analysis. You need to compare yourself to the other teams on the opposite side of the bench, and even to a certain extent to distinguish yourself between your bottom or your top half, as the case may be, so the judges can weigh your unique contributions to the debate to decide where you fit in the rankings for the debate. Generally speaking, what is helpful for BP? Well, focusing on framing the debate early and defining what the debate is really about, aiming to be relevant and distinct, particularly as back half teams, using POIs strategically to try to stay engaged throughout the debate is really important in BP. It's also generally acceptable in BP to ignore non-consequential or poorly developed arguments from your opponents. And we trust the judges to evaluate the relative strength of arguments when we talk about good arguments versus inconsequential, minor, or unimportant arguments in the debate. Since the topics are released in BP only 15 minutes before the round, you're not expected to cite any evidence or any research. The focus is on logic, framing, real-world examples to support the points that you're making, as opposed to citing some particular evidence or any particular piece of statistics to support the claims that you're making. Why am I going over these tips and these differences with BP? Because social justice debates are different. social justice debates, as we'll cover in a second, are not like BP. And so the things that you may be familiar with that work very well to get you the one in BP may not get you the win in social justice debates. And so in BP, you want to make sure you practice efficient rebuttal that's focused on just dismantling the premises of your opponent's arguments, not just their conclusions. And if you're sort of doing all the things that you see on this slide in BP, you're probably doing a great job and are on your way to getting the one. But in SJD, this is all not necessarily going to get you the win. And I'm distinguishing a one from a win because, as you'll hear from me in a minute, in social justice debates, round by round, it's not about a rank. It is about a win. You want to win the round against your singular opponent. So what is the social justice debate format? Well, and why did I create it? Because yes, I am the founder of the social justice debate format. Well, I won't go a lot into the whole history of SJD, but I'll say that about a decade ago, I noticed that we were debating, there was a desire amongst students in the United States to debate social justice issues, but a lot of the topics and the motions that were being set had no relationship to social justice issues. So in United States debate, you would find in our research-based formats, people trying to force social justice issues and connect them to the topic in some type of way. And so created this format so that you wouldn't have to do that. You wouldn't have to take a square peg and fit it into a round hole, so that if you care about social justice, you're a social justice advocate, then you will have a forum and a space to debate and discuss those social justice issues. And that forum can be based on evidence. Not only that, we sought to create a format that would be accessible, that would be inclusive, and that would be grounded in social justice literature on pressing social justice issues. And so we created that in the United States almost a decade ago now. Last year, our friends at TCRO, Eben, Dom, and many, many, many others at UDSM had the vision to say, hey, let's bring this format to Africa. More importantly, let's bring this format to Tanzania. And they decided to host the first SJD at the University of Dar es Salaam. It's very successful. By the way, if I hear you talking, I may just mute you as opposed to, but I will ask people to try to mute unless we're talking or asking questions. Otherwise, you don't be surprised if I try to mute you, because I see Misa is not muted, but I'm going to try to mute Misa now. Okay. So that's just a little background on sort of what social justice debates are and how they came to be and how we came to have an African version of social justice debates. Social justice debates involves two teams: an affirmative side, in BP we call that Gov, and a negative side, in BP we call that the Op. So there will be a winner and a loser, which is very different. Your strategy changes when you know you just have to beat one team in the room. You don't have to beat three other teams, just one. And so there's a laser-like focus on your opponents. And at the end of the debate, the judge has to make a difficult decision, because the judge has to declare someone's the winner and someone's the loser at the end of every social justice debate round. Now, the judging varies, because what we normally do is we usually, for preliminary rounds, we may use what we call traditional debate judges. So I think you'll have a mix of judges in Arusha. When I say mix, I mean ages. You'll probably have some college students. You'll probably have some people from the community. You have a diverse amount of people that all have probably some familiarity with debate who will be judging. But for the elimination rounds, they're in the process right now of recruiting what we call stakeholder judges. What are stakeholder judges? Stakeholder judges are experts or community-based folks that have some type of knowledge or experience, real-world experience, that's related to the topic. So that means they may work in the field. That means they may do research in the field. That means they may be a professor and they may lecture or teach a topic related to the field. That means they could be an attorney or a judge, someone who actually advocates on that particular social justice topic. We love having these stakeholder judges, these experts or community-based folks to judge our elimination rounds because it does change the debate. It creates a special obligation on you as the speaker to ensure, number one, that you know what you're talking about. It's very difficult to win an SJD round if you don't first know what you are talking about. Has anyone ever had a round they've been in another format of debate where your opponent's doing very well, but they actually don't know what they're talking about? That ever happened to anyone? If I can get some interaction, tired of looking at the screen and just seeing no faces. That never happened to anyone? I can't believe that. We've got too many people here for that.
It has, Ken.
Yes.
I don't know about the rest, but it has for me.
It has for you. Thank you, Farissa, for jumping in. I appreciate that contribution. So yeah, so it's happened to all of us. In SJD, we don't want that to happen. When I say we don't want that to happen, I mean we don't want people to win that way. We don't actually want people to win because they sound beautiful with their rhetoric, but their substance is absent. So in SJD, both matter. Both your matter and your manner are equally important in the debate. And so what do you need? What's the structure of SJD? What's that overall structure look like? Well, you got the two teams, affirmative, negative. You have 4 constructive speeches, meaning you can have, you will have, each constructive speech will be 6 minutes. Now you can have 2 or 3 person teams technically for SJD. If you have a 3-person team, what that will mean is that 2 people on your team will give, I don't know how that's happening. Is everyone seeing that someone is doing a yellow highlight on my slide? I don't know. Oh, okay, it's gone. Great. I don't know how that happened. If you have a 3-person team, it just means that 1 person will, 2 of those people will give the constructive speeches, and 1 person will be responsible for the rebuttal and won't have to give a constructive. If you have 2-person teams, then it means 1 person will give both a constructive and a rebuttal because there's only 1 rebuttal speech for each side. And so the constructive speeches are 6 minutes each. They're each followed by a cross-examination period, which is 4 minutes long. I'm going to see, let me pause, guys. I'm trying to figure out if there's a way I can turn off the ability for people to mark up the slides. I didn't even know that was a thing. Or I'll just ask everyone to maybe not turn off something. I guess I have to. Bear with me for a moment because I have no idea why people are mark up this for me sharing my screen. I had to control of this. This is a new one. Okay, it's gone now. So I'll just say, if you're watching this on your screen, do me a favor. I don't know how to immediately turn off the "you can't mark up my screen" option. So just do me a favor and don't do that. How about that? No annotations, please. All right. That said, back to the structure of how the speech is
Ken, I'm
Yes.
sorry. Could you kindly mute Amisa and Lamek?
Yes. So back to the structure. So there are 2 rebuttal speeches. Each side gets a 2-minute rebuttal. Right before the rebuttal speech, you get 2 minutes preparation time. In other words, you get time to actually collect your thoughts and figure out, what do you all want to say before this rebuttal? You don't get this in BP as a format. You should definitely take advantage of the fact that you get an opportunity to prepare before your rebuttal speech. That's a good time to talk to your teammates about whatever it is you may be thinking or you want to say. That's a good time to confirm that you're going to focus your rebuttal speech on the right issues. I'm not sure what's going on with this annotations again, but somehow it happened again, guys. Let me pause for a second because I have no idea why this annotation thing keeps happening, and I want to.
Is it possible if you could like make me co-host and I just deal with that? I don't know if you could do that.
Yeah, I can make you a host. Evan, let me do that. Actually, it's a good idea. Let me make you a host. Invitation issue is a new one for me. I think I turned off the annotate. Yeah, okay. I think I found the setting, Evan, where it says allow people to annotate shared content, and I've now turned it off.
Amazing.
So I don't think that changes this slide, but I think it should be good for the next one. I hope. Let's see. Oh, no, apparently this annotation is stuck. I've got to clear it somehow. So I think I turned it off, but I have not cleared it. Figure out how to clear it. Such a bizarre issue. Okay, I did that, trying to eliminate the annotation. There we go. Okay, I've gotten rid of the annotations. All right, we're back in business, everyone. Sorry for that. All right. Let me pause here on the structure. Are there any questions overall about the structure of the format? Hearing no questions, I am seeing no hands. Okay, let's just continue then. By the way, we're up to 25 people in this session, so we're up to some pretty healthy numbers. So what should be your emphasis then for, well, actually, let me go back on structure just a little bit, just to say one more word about the speeches. What should you be doing in your constructive speech in SJD? In your constructive speech, you should be presenting all of your arguments. That looks like in your first affirmative constructive, you're laying out what is your case, what is your advocacy, what is your advocacy on the motion. In your first negative constructive, you're laying out the same thing for the negative side, although you should save some time, even though you only have 6 minutes, you should save some time to say a word about the affirmative case. In other words, don't prepare a 6-minute first negative constructive. Prepare something less than that, so you have some time to say a few words about whatever the affirmative case may be. Then in your second speeches for your constructives, you can introduce any new material, any new arguments, any new evidence that you want. The focus of those speeches, though, usually looks like defending your case and refuting your opponents. That's what it usually looks like. Then at the end, for your final rebuttal speech, you do want to have a focus on clarity, persuasion, and sort of the relevance of all your evidence-based claims to the motion. This is where you want to explain why your side has won the debate and what are the reasons why your side has won the debate. What are the issues that the debate has come down to that the judges need to wrestle with? And you probably want to highlight or reiterate what were the key pieces of evidence that supported your side, that helps ground your claims in terms of why you are winning this debate. Emphasis. What should you be emphasizing in social justice as a format? You should be emphasizing making your arguments persuasive and clear communication. That means, yes, don't speak too fast. You should make sure that your case is rooted in some type of social justice principle and real world research, which means think about justice, think about labor justice in particular with this topic that we have. There are many different ways to conceive of justice. And I do think it's a permissible part of the debate for you to consider, or for you to even debate, what type of justice should you value in this particular round, given the topic, what is important. That's a legitimate, I think, part of the discussion here. Thirdly, you want to engage with both, therefore, the policy and the ethical dimensions of the debate. And lastly, just be conscious that your judges, particularly in the elimination rounds, could be conscious of who your audience is. In other words, be conscious that you may be speaking to professors or activists or professionals or community leaders, not just trained debate people, which means that you don't want to overly rely upon debate jargon, because in your elimination rounds, you might not be judged by anyone who is familiar with said debate jargon. And you want to make sure that your entire speech is accessible to your audience. That's important. One of the things that we do with debate in this format is we make it so friendly and so accessible that anyone from the public, anyone from the community could come in and observe the debate and understand what is happening, because the rhetoric that is being used is that accessible to people. So what are some helpful tips? Make your arguments accessible, avoid the jargon, speak with purpose, use examples and evidence to support your arguments, speak slowly and persuasively so that you have good style. Don't overlook the importance of the significance of cross-examination, which is critical. During cross-examination, you want to ask sort of clear, purposeful questions that expose flaws in your opponent's position. You want to make sure, and this is a key difference I'm going to focus on for a sec, in SJD, you do want to try to respond to all your opponent's major arguments. If you omit points, that can make it appear as though you concede them. So unlike a BP debate where, the judge has 4 different teams whose contributions that they have to weigh, and where there frankly is not enough time, and there's not an expectation that you respond to every single point that a speaker makes, right, in a BP debate. In fact, if you're a top half team, it's literally impossible for you to respond to all the points that your bottom half teams make, because you don't get another opportunity to speak. At best, you may get an opportunity for a couple of POIs. But that's different in SJD. In SJD, you do get an opportunity to respond to all of the points made by your opponent. So after the first affirmative constructive, the opposition gets 2 opportunities actually to respond to everything that's in the affirmative case. If you're affirmative, you get an opportunity in a constructive speech to respond to the first negatives case. You get a chance to address every single point that they make. So in that way, SJD is really a little bit different than BP, that allows you, for good reasons, to be able to ignore some of the lesser important points in the judges, and you can just sort of trust that the judges can figure that out. I'd be less apt to trust the judges to just figure out what's important, and that may be perceived as a concession. And so you want to make sure you address all of your opponent's major arguments in the SJD format. Next, you want to make sure that you understand your research and your evidence are critical, which means you should be citing sources. Does that mean you need to cite evidence for every single point you make? No, you don't have to do that. But if you have 2 or 3 major arguments in the debate, you should have 2 or 3 pieces of evidence, right, to support those major arguments. In other words, if an argument is significant enough for you to spend, let's say, 2 minutes on it of your 6-minute speech, you should have at least one piece of evidence that supports that argument. Evidence can be a variety of different things. It can be statistics. It can be historical examples. You can cite experts. You can cite articles, news reports. There's so many different things that can qualify as evidence to support your point. But what you don't want to do is you don't want to just go up and freestyle it and just give your sort of analysis like you would in the BP debate that you came up with in 15 minutes before the debate. The topic is already released. Everyone knows what the topic is. We give you a topic statement, which is pretty important that you should read and you should pay careful attention to, because that topic statement is designed to clarify what the debate is all about. It also gives you a list of research, and we even provided you with some of those, the research the topic statements based on. So you got an evidentiary basis to sort of start your preparation for the debate. So if you don't read anything else, at least read the evidence that we gave you in connection with the topic, and you can use that evidence as well in your debates and in your cases. We want you to prepare cases that are designed to connect with real-world implications. We want you to be able to explain how your argument affects people, institutions, or justice. Remember, we intend to have the final round at the EAC. I think there was someone talking. We intend to have the final round at the EAC, which means that you're going to be a place that has to wrestle with this issue of the CMP, all the time. This is a real issue for them. So having our great intellectual minds from near and far talk about these issues and what the controversies are, the debates in a real way, they can make a real difference. One of the things I see often with social justice debates back in the States is we'll have some of the judges after the debate say, students came up with some arguments or some perspectives that I hadn't thought about before. I never considered them. What I heard is going to make a difference in terms of the way that I do my job or the way or what I advocate for. So that's sort of another hidden benefit of SJD, is that you have the ability to not just win the round, you have the ability to persuade and influence real people who are involved on this topic in a real way every day. And so you don't generally get that kind of opportunity with other debate formats. You will get that opportunity here, however, with SJD. So a little bit about the differences between cross-examination and points of information. And by the way, if you're wondering how long this session is, we designed the session to be about an hour long. I'm about 35 minutes into it, so we do have a good 25 minutes left, and I do have time at the end for whatever additional questions that you have. So cross-examination versus, well, before I get into cross-examination versus points of information, let me pause. Are there any questions about anything so far? I don't see any hands up.
Yes, there was a question by, I don't want to mispronounce the name. They said I have a question, but they never really typed it. So if you can hear me, you can ask your question.
I do see
Sajadali, I
in the
believe.
chat from Dino. And the answer to your question, Dino, can you get this presentation? The answer is yes, or Dennis. We will be emailing a copy of this slide deck to everyone who's attended the session, if you signed up.
I had a few questions. One of which was, in a debate, you said like you need evidence, and sometimes like, how do you get the evidence? Like, I kind of don't understand, because you don't really look into the evidence because you're like given the topic then and now. They don't really have the evidence. So
Excellent question. And I am going to talk a little bit more about this in this presentation about in terms of her question is, where do you get the evidence from? The short answer to that question is anywhere, everywhere. So I'll give you specific suggestions. Number one, researching online. There are a variety of different websites that you can go to search for good evidence. You can begin as simple as starting with Google or starting with Google Scholar or whatever your search engine is of choice these days. There's so many different good search engines you can use to find evidence. Secondly, you can go to a library, whether that's a library on UDSM's campus if you're in DAR, or whatever library you can get access to. Thirdly, I would say you can again start with the evidence that we've provided you. There is a if you on the flyer there was a link to the topic statement, and there was also a file that was labeled topic resources, and in that file there are a variety of different articles. The other thing I would do is encourage you to work with members of your team and share evidence amongst each other as a team or as a squad or as a school. We certainly do that. For example, I'm the director of debate at Morehouse College, and we certainly do that at the Morehouse team. It's a good idea to create, for example, a shared drive or some type of shared space, for example, a Google Drive space, and so that everyone on your team, as they gather up evidence or research that they think is good or important to share with the team, they can just sort of save it there so that everyone has a central repository of evidence that's equally accessible to everyone on the team, and so that you don't feel like you're just alone and you have to do all your research by yourself. No, it's perfectly acceptable to communicate with people and to share evidence amongst others. We can talk about more specific places to find evidence on this particular topic in a minute, but I just wanted to give a quick answer to that question. Any other questions? Okay. So the differences between cross-examination and points of information.
Ken,
Yes.
just maybe clarity for people here. So in the likes of like a judge, which of the two is like given precedence or priority? Is it the content or like the strategic content or the evidence? So can a person win a debate if they have like real, because like these are BP, maybe you have a BP argument that's like brought up in the debate but doesn't necessarily have evidence attached to it, or you have a person who has a lot of evidence but doesn't know how to like strategically use that in the debate. Which of the two people are prioritized or preferred?
Excellent question. I actually have a slide a little bit later in this presentation that illustrates the answer I'm going to give you. But the short version of the answer is you need evidence to win, period. But just because you have evidence does not mean that you win. So when it comes to, there's kind of three brief things I want to say to answer that question. The first is it's quality over quantity. So no, the person who has the more evidence doesn't win just because they cite more evidence than their opponent, because you could have 3 pieces of evidence that all say the same thing, which is redundant, and so you really wasted your time, and that really didn't help you that you had a quote unquote a lot of evidence. The quality of the argument itself always matters. Secondly, remember where the evidence fits in. The evidence is just a piece of the argument. The same way your analysis is just a piece of a good argument. A good argument actually has 3 components. It has a point, which is whatever the claim is you're making. It has analysis, which are the reasons why that claim is true, and your analysis should connect your evidence to the claim. It should explain how your evidence supports the claim. Sometimes people refer to this as warrants also to support your claim. And then it should be backed up by some piece of evidence. I would suggest to you that if you're missing any one of those 3 elements, you have an incomplete argument. But the fact that you have all 3 doesn't mean you win the debate. It just means you made a good argument. Now, as a judge, I have to weigh that against the other good arguments that hopefully should be in the debate. Does that answer your question, Evan?
Totally.
Great. And again, just to reiterate, you don't have to have a piece of evidence to support everything that you say. Although, if you make a point, particularly based on something that you think is common knowledge or common information, and then your opponent says, well, I'm sorry, that's not true. This does happen sometimes in BP. That's not true. You said this thing, but I don't think that's true. If your opponent has a piece of evidence to support their claim of truth and you don't, who do you think is going to win the outcome of that clash? Probably the person with the evidence to support that factual claim. And if I'm a judge, I'm going to give preference to the person who has evidence to support a particular claim versus the person who does not. But claims don't win debates by themselves. Arguments win debates. Renson, what's your question?
So basically, like for the third speaker, the role of the third speaker, it is the summary and everything. So can the third speaker bring about some evidence regarding the claims or the points that were made by the first and the second speakers?
So yes, much like a whip speech in BP debate, you could add a piece of evidence in your rebuttal speech. You can't add any new arguments. There are no new arguments in rebuttal speeches. But if there was a particular piece of evidence that you thought was necessary or would be helpful for the judge in evaluating their decision for the existing arguments that are in the debate, then you could add that. But most of the time, I would expect that your evidence is going to be presented in the constructive speeches and that the rebuttal speeches are going to be more analysis about the evidence that's already been introduced into the debate by both sides.
I have one question as well. So, when you're like debating and you have to say a speech, so can you give us like a tip on making it persuasive, like the icing on the cake of making the opposer, like exposing the opposer and like all of that? And actually, like I don't know how to explain it, but I hope you get it.
I think I get it. So the thing I will remember for this is the key elements that make a speech persuasive are not really different from either format. In other words, there are three basic things that you want to have to make any speech persuasive. You want to have a strong introduction that really grabs the attention of the audience and frames the debate or frames your case or argument. Two, you want to be organized and have good structure. You want to tell us the structure. In other words, you want to preview, I'm going to have 2 arguments or I have 3 arguments and this is what they are. And then give me those arguments. In other words, you paint me a picture of a roadmap and then you follow that roadmap. And then I think thirdly, you want to make sure that as a speaker, rhetorically, you're doing those things that good speakers do, which usually involve good eye contact, a pace that is not too fast for you, that is accessible. You don't need to be too slow either, but certainly you don't want to be too fast so that your words are unintelligible. But I usually suggest trying to speak in a conversational tone. Conversational tone will vary by speaker based on the pitch or the tone of your voice. Meaning if you have a higher pitch voice, you can speak at a faster rate for a conversational tone compared to if you have a lower pitch voice. I think if you just follow those three points, then you'll probably have a decent speech. Okay, cross-examination versus points of information. So for SJ, I put together this nice little summary chart for you just to illustrate the differences, which is, number one is the timing, because cross-examination is a defined period of time after each constructive speech, whereas POIs interrupt a speaker. You can't interrupt a speaker with any questions in the SJD format because you get a whole 4 minutes dedicated to just grilling them with questions. And so that's direct questions. Because you get that, With BP, you tend to have more of a setup for your questions. In other words, someone recognizes you for a POI, you get up to 15 seconds to ask that question. There's a tendency to want to maybe talk for 5 or maybe even 10 of those seconds before you even ask the question, because you only get one question, right? Well, when you have 4 minutes to ask questions, you don't need to do that. In other words, it's more effective for you to ask short, controlled, which are closed-ended questions. Yes, no questions is what I mean by a closed-ended question, to elicit responses so that you set up the ultimate question you're trying to ask through a series of questions that you ask your opponent. So that's structured and it's controlled, because you do get the opportunity for follow-up questions since it's a defined period of time. Whereas in BP, you ask your one POI, you got to sit down. There is no follow-up opportunity. What's the purpose? I say always use your questions to first clarify anything in the debate that you don't understand. Secondly, to try to expose any kind of flaws. Thirdly, to try to maybe press weak positions, or to try to start to set up your argument for the debate. There's going to be in one of the future sessions, we can go through cross-examination strategy. I can talk to you more about how do you conduct an effective cross-examination. I could do a whole hour on just conducting a cross-examination. The point here is just for you today is for you just to understand the difference between asking questions via cross-examination versus asking POIs. So when you start cross-examination, you should have a goal. You should know what you're trying to accomplish or expose before you even ask your first question. So yeah, plan out some cross-examinations. 2, start with clarity. Use short, simple questions to establish the facts or the premises that you want to base your ultimate conclusion on. Thirdly, use leading questions, as I said before, which are questions that guide the opponent towards an answer to help your case. 4, stay calm and in control. This can be hard, especially when you're in the heat of argumentative battle. Try to avoid arguing with your opponent during cross-examination. It is not time to argue. It is not time to make a speech. If you are asking the questions during cross-examination, let your questions do the work for you. You're going to get a chance to make another speech after your right after, in fact, your cross-examination is over. So resist the temptation or the urge to argue with whatever your opponent says. Instead, it's a much better cross-examination strategy. If they say something that you just think is wrong, it's much better to then ask them follow-up questions based on the facts that are the basis for why you believe they're wrong. And let's walk through that analysis together with you, your opponent, and the judge, so you can expose the flaw in their reasoning. Exposing their flaws in their reasoning through questions is a lot more effective, you'll find, than just trying to tell your opponent, oh, that's wrong, or I disagree. Next, don't waste your time. If your opponent is being evasive, they're dodging their question, don't be afraid to move on. The judge can see when you're being evasive. Don't be afraid to reframe the question. Or, this is a tip that's not on the slide, if they're really not answering a basic, very direct question, don't be afraid to just ask the same question again with the same words in the same way, just to illustrate or emphasize, they're not answering my question, Judge. So if I ask you, okay, I'll just give you a simple example. Where did you go last night? And you say, well, you know, today I decided to go to Professor Ken's session on social justice debates. You didn't answer my question. I'm going to ask you again. Where did you go last night? Well, you know, this weekend, I got some plans. I'm going to the movies. I'm going to hang out with my friends. It's nice. But where did you go last night? You see, I'm not going to let my opponent being evasive or trying to change the topic distract me or make me lose focus, because if they're not answering my question, for sure there's a good reason why they're probably not answering my question. They probably know if they answer the question truthfully, it's going to be bad for their side. So that's another cross-examination technique or strategy, if you will. Lastly, and most importantly, if you get a good admission during cross-examination, use it in your rebuttal, refer back to it. You can take your answers, you can take answers or admissions you get in cross-examination and use them in your speeches, and you should. Sometimes it may not be obvious to the judge as to what the point was of a good admission that you got. Tell the judge, hey, in cross-examination, they told you this, and then tell the judge why that was really important, that you obtained that admission, and you can use that. Sometimes you can win an entire debate just in the cross-examination period because of the concessions you're able to get from your opponent. So I won't go through all this again. This chart just summarizes the differences between social justice debates and BP. So it's more of a summary slide for you. I want to make sure I have time to talk about evidence during these last 10 minutes. And then after we talk about evidence, then we're going to open it up for more questions. And so using evidence in debate, this is a very brief guide to research, organization, and strategic use of evidence, since I told you it was so important in this format. And so what I'm going to cover briefly is brainstorming what to research, trying to gather evidence, organizing that evidence, using what I'm going to call the PADS model. I'll explain that in a sec. How you use evidence in the debate round itself. And then we can go through sort of some final tips. Some final tips of using evidence. So I also have I have a handout that I will also email to everyone on using evidence in debate, so that you can be able to refer to that and consult that. By the way, has everyone seen a social justice debate before? If not, I'm gonna when we get to the Q&A, if you give me a sec, I'll post some links. There are on YouTube. There are sample social justice debates. It's in a different topic, but if you've never seen a social justice debate and you're like, I just want to watch one, I just want to see what it looks like and see how it flows, there are a couple of good ones online on YouTube, and I can share those links with everyone, or we can have them sent out when Forrester sends out these slides. We can put them in the email. Maybe that's even easier for people. All right, so let's talk about research, brainstorming, what to research. Firstly, so when you're trying to brainstorm what to research, this is when you're asking yourself questions so you can try to figure out, like, what should I be looking for? And these are some of the key questions you should ask yourself. What claims are we trying to make in this debate? What do we need to prove to support those claims? What injustices are we going to focus on, we highlighting in our case? What mechanisms or solutions are we defending? And then we want to try to organize our research into different themes, definitions, case studies, data, countries, opposition arguments. By the way, these themes aren't meant to be a restrictive list. This list is illustrative, which means that these are just examples of potential themes or categories you could use. Feel free to come up with, and you should come up with your own additional ones. But like as you start thinking about the topic and you start thinking about sort of what are the key claims your side is making, I'll give you an example. You might be on the side of the debate arguing that the common market protocol creates long-term labor justice. So if you're going to argue CMP creates long-term labor justice, then you need to probably start thinking about, okay, how can I prove that the CMP creates long-term labor justice? Where has it created labor justice for anyone that's implemented, who in fact has implemented it successfully to create some labor justice? And then you start looking for that kind of evidence. When you start thinking about, well, what do I need to prove to make my claim persuasive? For a claim like that, you might think about structural benefits. You might think about a reduction in exploitation. Certainly, if there's been a reduction in labor exploitation through the implementation of the CMP, then that'd be pretty good evidence, right? To support that claim. Or maybe I can find some legal precedents that show that the CMP helped create some long-term labor justice in some way. You might think about asking yourself the question of, well, wait a minute, what injustices am I trying to address on this topic? You might think about exploitation of informal laborers. That's something that's talked about in the topic statement, right? You might think about the risks of trafficking. You might think about things like the permit inequalities or the inequities in the worker permit system that exists between countries. And so when you think about, okay, what injustice do I want to focus on? If I know, for example, I want to focus on permit inequalities, what am I probably going to do? I'm probably going to make sure I understand, which means I have to do research, what the permit requirements are for all of the different countries in East Africa. Matter of fact, I might even have me a file or a folder labeled permit inequalities or permit issues. And all my research and my articles on that topic, I dump it into that particular folder so that I can be well read and have evidence on that particular issue. You're for sure going to think about what mechanisms, right, or what policies you're defending, which means you might want to research how the CMP is supposed to work versus how things actually work, right? Because there's always a difference between how we think something's going to work, like theoretically, versus how things actually work in reality. We've seen that, for example, with socialism, which on paper might sound great. And then you look at real world examples where they've attempted to implement it, and then you're like, oh, that didn't work out so well. Why are these capitalist economies and capitalist countries doing so much better? Why do some capitalist countries have more rights than some countries that have socialism? That's interesting, right? That's what we see when we start comparing how things are supposed to work to the way things actually work in the real world, which is why, again, research is important so that you can sort of delve into those differences between what you think is true versus what is actually true. So this is all what you do at the brainstorming stage of research, which means when you're brainstorming, there's no right or wrong because you're just coming up with different thoughts and different ideas, and then you're going to check them out. You're going to explore your different thoughts and your ideas in this phase. Then you start gathering evidence. And we had the question earlier, well, where do I get my evidence from? Well, let me suggest you should think about these 4 things for getting evidence. Number 1, you want to use evidence that's credible, which means that you got to think about the person that's saying the evidence or that wrote the evidence. Are they qualified to say what they're saying? That's recent. You probably evidence from the last 10 years when people are trying to implement CMP is probably much better maybe than evidence from a few decades ago before the CMP was even an idea. And you want to make sure you're using sources that are relevant to the topic. So try to use primary sources if you can. There are plenty of primary sources and secondary sources that could be good. You could also look for NGO reports. NGOs are non-governmental organizations who may provide reports on things that are relevant to the topic. You can look for academic research because I promise you, there are academics who have done the research for you because this is what they love. So find their research and see what they've had to say about the topic. Don't feel like, oh my gosh, I've got to figure out all this stuff myself. No, what you've got to do is figure out who are the people who are already researching this topic and writing about it and talking about it and what have they said and what conclusions have they come up with, and then find that stuff. Or what have journalists said? There's been a lot of reporting in journalism. We cite a couple of a couple of news articles, at least in the materials that we've provided you. You also, when you're gathering your evidence, you want to track contradictory evidence for rebuttals. In other words, just because evidence doesn't support what you're looking for or the point you're looking to make, don't ignore it. Don't ignore it. The other side's not going to ignore it if they're doing their research. Pay attention. You may want to segregate it, though. You may want to put it in a separate place to organize it and say, okay, I know this is some evidence I saw that might be used to refute my claim. Think about how, if your opponent saw that evidence, how would you deal with that? How would you deal with that? And let me suggest to you that the debates are won right now. Everyone thinks the debates are won when they show up. No, the debate, what will determine whether you will win your debate rounds is between what you do between now and over the course of the next month, because the people who prepare the best have the better chance of succeeding in this debate format. And then you want to save your citations, annotate your excerpts. In other words, you may take a piece of evidence of a card or an excerpt out of the article that you find make sure you annotate that so you know at least who you got it from, what the name of the article was, and what the year of publication was. That's what I mean when I say annotate excerpts. And so you gather your evidence and you organize it. You organize it. That's my third point. You organize it. When you're organizing it, it's helpful to have a tagline or a point, which is just basically a one-sentence claim. What does this piece of evidence stand for? What does it show? You want to have that citation, that source name, that author, that date. You want to have whatever the relevant excerpt or paraphrase is from that evidence. In other words, there was some reason you liked that piece of evidence. What was that? What is the good part of that evidence that you want to use or you might want to use in the debate? And then put that in a folder or in some type of digital folder. You can use your laptops or electronic devices. You can bring those to SJD. Bringing electronic devices is permitted in this format. Although I discourage you from trying to do research during the debate. It's not against the rules. I just don't think you have time. I think it's a bad idea time-wise, bad use of your time during the debate. 4, using the PADS model. What is that? That is what I talked about before, the components of an argument, which is a point. What claim are you asserting? Your analysis. Why is this claim true or justified? And provide reasons. And your data. What evidence do you have to support this point you're trying to make? And then lastly, significance. Sometimes in BP or World Schools format, we call this impact. But why does this point, why does this argument matter for justice or for the round of the debate? Discuss the impact or the significance of this argument you're making. And so if you have all of this, let me suggest to you, if you have everything on this slide, you have a good argument. If you have a point, clear point that you're making, you have analysis, it's backed up by data, and you can explain the significance of that point, either to justice or for the debate round itself, then you have everything you need for a good argument. And you probably, in this format, only have time for 2 or 3 good arguments, because obviously to have a good argument, you need a few things. You need a lot of things, right, to go into a good argument. 5, evidence in action. This is using evidence in the debate. So you want to cite sources out loud. That boosts your credibility. It's different if I say, well, Ken thinks CMP is going to bring us justice, compared to if I say, well, Dr. Parmet wrote an article in the Labor Justice magazine where about a study he did that showed that the CMP has already obtained labor justice. There's a difference, right, between those two. Use your evidence comparatively to clash with your opponent's argument, if you can. Refer back to your evidence and rebuttals and cross-examination. In other words, if your opponent's grilling you about something they just thought of on the spot, but you've got evidence that refutes what they're saying, use your evidence in your answers. That's a nice thought. That's a good idea. But, Dr. Sundstrom wrote a whole book explaining why your premise of your question's wrong. That's powerful rebuttal or response. Then don't just cite statistics. Don't just say a bunch of numbers. Always try to tell stories with your evidence so that you can try to humanize your data. That's making it real for people. It's making it very real for people, which is always a good thing to do. You'll see some examples in the handout that I'm going to email you guys of all of these points, so that you can sort of have a good illustration of like what this means. I'm mindful of the time, so that's why I'm not going through the details of all my examples for that right now. So I'm looking at the clock in respect of everyone's time. So final tips: don't ignore evidence. If your opponent has some evidence in the debate that they're hammering, that they thinking that evidence is winning the debate for them, analyze it, weigh it in the round. Make sure you adapt to these civic style judges. Clarity is more important than jargon. Try to use evidence in all parts of the debate. In other words, use your evidence in your constructives, in your cross-ex, in your rebuttal. Phrases like "this is supported by," or "according to," or "this proves that" are helpful phrases you might use when you're trying to incorporate evidence into your argument or into your speech. So in conclusion, remember in BP, you're trying to stand out amongst 4 teams and think strategically in that regard. But in social justice, you want to connect with the audience. You've only got 1 team to beat. Speak as if you're testifying before a community board, not just trying to win points. Use your evidence effectively. And both clarity and structure are important. Signposting your arguments are important, and explaining their significance are important. Remember, debate is not just about being right. It's about persuasion at the end of the day, framing, empathy, and reason. Whether you're in a BP debate or you're presenting an SJD case, your panel of scholars, your voice matters, and we hope everyone will use their voices well. And that's it. I'm going to stop sharing my screen and make sure my camera's on and take any questions that you all have regarding this format or the differences between SJD and BP. Or World Schools for that matter, if you had that. All right. Should have stopped sharing my screen, I believe. I believe you can see my smiling face. Yes. Questions? Don't be afraid to ask questions, by the way. I love questions. That's what I'm here for. I've actually got another 20 minutes I've allocated to just answer questions. So I've got the time, if you've got the time, for more questions. How about your faces? Can I at least get people who can? I realize people may be at home. It's nighttime there. It's like 9 o'clock, I think, in Tanzania. Can I at least see faces? How about that? Because you all are seeing my face, but I'd love to see your faces. If you can show your face. I know sometimes people may be, I don't know, laying in the bed, listening to some guy talk, so they don't want to show their face. No questions? Come on. I know you've got it. Even if you think I don't want to ask that question again, he already talked about that. It's okay. Even if you think I'm going to embarrass myself, remember, this is an introductory session, which means that everyone who came here primarily because they're not really familiar or comfortable with this format yet. And the whole goal of this session is to get you familiar with the format so that you can feel more comfortable and more confident and feel like, okay, you know what? Now I'm ready to start my research. I understand the format. I got a general idea of what I'm supposed to do. I understand how it's different than other formats of debate that I may be familiar with. Now I'm ready to go start my research, read everything that they already gave us, and start working on my affirmative case. And then if you do that, probably in the next 2 weeks, we'll have another session where I'll focus on case construction. And that will be a lot more meaningful to you if you've already started researching and already read about the topic, which is why I'm not doing that now. Because if you haven't done any research or any reading about the topic, I'll be talking, but it won't connect. It won't make sense. Trust me, I've read about this topic. It's very dense. Oh, I love Farissa's comment. She says, it looks like everyone's ready to take on SJD since there are no more questions. I just don't believe there are no questions. I believe people are probably intimidated to ask a question. There we go. A brave volunteer. Gabriella, please go ahead.
Good evening.
Good evening.
So I wanted to ask if there are any distinctive roles and for the speakers, and if there are any, could you please explain that?
Yes.
Thank you.
Happy to elaborate on that. So the question is, are there any distinctive roles for the speakers? Or maybe rephrasing her question, how do we decide between me and my partner who does which speech? Because we're not sure. Let's start from the perspective of the affirmative. If you're the first affirmative speaker, you're giving the first speech, in some ways you have the easiest job of the debate. Why? Because that first affirmative constructive is 100% prepared speech. That 6-minute speech there's no reason that speech shouldn't be prepared and practiced probably multiple times before you ever show up to the debate. So if you like giving pre-prepared speeches and manuscripts, or even if, I'm not saying just read the speech, because I don't like when people just do this. This is not good persuasive speaking. I'm just reading from my paper. I'm hiding, right? Don't deliver your first speech like that, even if it is prepared. But the first speech is prepared. So however, the first speaker also has to answer all the questions about the first speech and about your case. So while it's easy to give that first speech because it's all prepared, that person needs to know that case inside and out in order to be able to answer all the questions. We discourage what's called tag team cross-examination, which means that your partner can't save you. I mean, they can, but we discourage your partner trying to save you. If you speak, you should be able to answer questions about your speech. The second affirmative speaker, on the other hand, is not a prepared speech, right? The second affirmative constructive should be responding to everything that first negative speaker said, which means they've got to take good notes. They've got to be prepared to refute every point that that is made. If they're really good at extemporaneous rebuttal on the fly, then they're going to shine in that spot. Compared to the last speech, which is the final rebuttal in the debate, that speaker has to be really good at identifying what is this debate all about? What's it come down to? What are the key issues in the debate? And how do I summarize? This debate? But not just summarize for the sake of like repeating what's already been said. That's not useful. But summarize in the sense of condensing down. If it seems like we had 10 issues we were discussing, how do I distill that to 4 and then explain to the judge why we've won those 4 issues so that we won the debate? Similarly, on the flip side, if you're negative, that first negative speech is mostly a prepared speech, not entirely. Like I said, save some time to rebut the affirmative case, but mostly it's a prepared speech compared to that second negative speech, which is 100% not a prepared, right, speech, because you're responding to whatever that second affirmative constructive before you. If you're doing negative rebuttal, you're doing the same thing that the affirmative rebuttal is doing. So hopefully maybe those roles for those different speeches help give you some guidance on which speech you should try to choose or advocate for your partner to choose. I answer your question, Gabriella, or you have a follow-up?
Yes, you did. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. More questions?
I have a question, more like
Yes.
hoping to reach the other audience. We are going to have a high school and uni break, right? So I know that there's some high school students who are interested. So what would you say, or what advice would you give the high schoolers who are coming in this uni competition, especially in this format that's pretty new, at least in their region, Arusha region? What would you tell them, and how they could possibly prepare for it as well? Yeah.
I tell the high school students that, number one, don't be intimidated by the fact that it's a new format. If anything, that makes it easier for you to compete against tertiary level students because it's new for them too. Everyone's on an equal playing field. Secondly, do your homework, do your research, be knowledgeable about the topic, because that is also the great equalizer. Everyone has the same opportunity in terms of time to research and gather evidence and to read about the topic. And if you are better prepared in terms of research and evidence, you for sure are going to have a better opportunity to succeed. And then lastly, I would just say always speak with confidence. Even if you don't feel confident, fake it, pretend. Don't ever let them see that you don't feel confident. Just by speaking confidently or presenting in that manner, it's going to give you an advantage.
Okay. I think that's very useful. Thank you, Ken. There are 2 questions on the chat. Number 1 is, how do you press on the weak points of your opponents? And number 2, shall the high schoolers be debating against us?
Okay. First question, how do you press on the weak points of your opponents? It's easy in this format because the speech right before you, if they had a bunch of weak points, you get to point them out. Now, one thing I wouldn't do, I wouldn't waste my time, too much time, on weak points of my opponents. In other words, I'm going to say something about the weak point, but I'm not going to waste a minute of my time rebutting a point that was ultimately weak. If it was a weak point, it probably doesn't deserve that much of my attention. I probably can do away with it in 5 or 10 seconds. And that's probably what I should do, unless the weak point was consequential. In other words, you know it's a weak point. Maybe the judge doesn't know it's a weak point. Maybe it's not obvious that it's a weak point. And maybe this point that you believe is a weak point, your opponent presented it like it's going to win them the entire debate. So in that case, you do need to give that weak point some attention. I think if you anytime you have any evidence to refute someone's weak point, you use it. Second question was, shall high schoolers be debating against us? Yes and no. So we're going to have the preliminary rounds are going to be open, which means you'll have, just like you would if you were at a BP tournament and you have ESL speakers and EFL speakers competing against native English speakers all in one open prelims. It'll be just like that, but then there'll be a separate break. So there'll be a tertiary schools break, and then there'll be a secondary schools break, so that for the elimination rounds, then you won't be competing against high schoolers. Oh, I see a new question in the chat from Juma. How do you connect with your audience and prove to the judge that your evidence is better in the final speech? Well, there's a few things that go into, a few criteria or guidelines you could use to determine whether your evidence is better. Because ultimately, me saying my evidence is better is just another argument. But you can consider, number one, recency, meaning how recent is my evidence compared to my opponent? Am I citing things from a study from last year and they're citing things from a decade ago, so that really their evidence is not really up to date? You can consider the qualifications of the person who provided the evidence. So are you citing, for example, a labor expert that really has done a lot of research and writing about these issues, and they're citing, let's say, a newspaper article from CNN.com. So yes, you have two people who have both written articles about this topic, but these authors are not the same. One is more qualified than the other, which goes to the weight of the evidence. And then thirdly, the quality of the evidence, meaning, is the evidence just a bunch of conclusory assertions, as sometimes newspaper articles can be, or is the evidence like a peer-reviewed journal article that was based on some study? That's probably like the highest level in terms of quality of evidence. So consider all those three factors: timing, who said it, and then the quality of the evidence, and comparing those to make your argument of your evidence is actually the best evidence. And don't presume that the judge heard your evidence, heard their evidence, and they already know what the best is. No, the burden is on you as a speaker, if it matters, if it even matters. Because the reason why I say if it matters is because you might have better evidence than someone on a point. But remember, going back to my model, the evidence you have is just one element of your argument. Your evidence is not your argument. Your argument consists of your claim, your analysis, and your evidence. It's all of it together. So don't confuse having good evidence or even a better piece of evidence with having a better argument, because it's not necessarily the case. I think I've answered that question. Any follow-up? I'm here for it. We got about 7 more minutes. Nope. Okay. One more plea. Can I see your faces? For the people who are left, I see some people have left. But for those of you left, because here's what's going to happen. We're going to do these sessions. They're going to be all online. Then I'm going to come to Arusha, And then you all gonna see me and say, hey, Ken, I really enjoyed you from the session. And I'm gonna say, who are you? I don't even know what you look like. I don't know who this person is because all I saw were black screens. Most people don't even have pictures.
But today, Ken will forgive them considering the time and the
Oh,
day.
not
Next
today. I had to at least ask. Maybe next time.
Yes, next time there's no going out. There's no letting it easy. Yeah. But this time this one I'll forgive because even I myself I'm not in position to have my screen on. But next time,
Okay.
no way out, guys. No way out.
And
Yes.
just know this, guys, whenever your professors are teaching classes online or presenting online, it's just the worst to just talk to a black screen and not be able to have the interaction of nonverbal communication. You know, we love to talk, don't we? But most communication studies show that the majority of communication is actually nonverbal. So our facial expressions, our hand gestures, our body language, all of that matters in communication. All right. Well, I guess we're good. There are no more questions. Thank you all for taking the time out on your Friday evening to hear me talk. I hope everyone has a good weekend. And I'll just say, keep on the lookout on your email for the follow-up for Farissa with some additional materials and for an announcement about when we'll have our next session.
Thank you so much, Ken. Looking forward to these workshops, and seeing you guys in Arusha. Thank you so much.
Great. You're welcome. I'm going to wait till people actually leave because since I'm the host, I think if I click end, then it'll just kill everyone. Just in case someone's lingering with a question. Nope, that's it. All right. Good night, everyone. Night, Farissa.
Imagine
Thank
like
you for
coming
everything.
off with a phone.